Good morning, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of the Bermuda Tech Summit, entitled Innovation and Regulation, a Balancing Act. My name is Lydia Dickens. I am a co-founder and managing director of Conci, a Bermuda-based company that provides advisory services in the areas of public policy, legislation, and technology. I am also your moderator for this panel. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we encourage you to click on the Q&A box below and submit your questions. Bermuda is well known as the world's risk capital, which many attribute to the country's ability to foster and support innovation and leadership in the global insurance industry. In fact, Bermuda is considered an ideal location for creating bespoke solutions for risk management that are governed by a world-class regulatory framework for insurance. In 2018, with the introduction of a regulatory framework for digital asset businesses, Bermuda began to forge a new path toward encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship within a different landscape. Drawing on its stellar reputation and experience for regulation of insurance and other financial institutions, Bermuda is working hard to create yet another world-class framework for digital asset businesses. In this session, we'll talk about Bermuda's approach to regulating this emerging sector. We'll also talk about some of the ways in which Bermuda differs from other jurisdictions, and we'll hear a bit from the panelists about how things are going thus far. So let's start with a brief introduction of our panelists. Jeremy, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on the panel and the session today. I'm Jeremy Allaire. I'm the founder, chairman, and CEO of Circle. Circle is a company in the digital currency industry. Prior to founding Circle, I've been building internet technology companies since the early 1990s, and really got started with Circle in 2013. Our focus is on really using blockchain technology to make it possible to use what we think of as traditional currencies like dollars or euros or other currencies, and use those as cryptocurrencies and digital currencies. And so we are the one of the creators of something called US dollar coin, or USDC. It's the fastest growing digital dollar, digital currency in the world right now. And we've been working with the Bermuda government and the BMA around introducing products and services that are built up around that product line and capability.
Okay, thank you very much. Moad, how about an introduction?
Thank you, Lydia, and thanks for the invite. Well, I'm Moad Fahmi. I'm the senior advisor for Fintech at the Bermuda Monetary Authority. The Bermuda Monetary Authority is the integrated financial regulator for Bermuda. So that means we regulate insurance companies, banks, investment companies, as well as digital asset companies and others. So yeah, really glad to be here.
Okay, thank you very much. Miss Natalie.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. My name is Natalie Neto. I'm a partner at Walker's Bermuda office, where I am head of the Fintech team. I'm also chair of the Bermuda Business Development Agency's Technology, Legal and Regulatory Subcommittee. And in my day job, I advise fintech companies of all shapes and sizes on Bermuda's legal and regulatory framework around digital assets and digital assets issuances.
Okay. And Dan, certainly last but not least.
Hi guys, nice to be here. Yeah, my name is Dan Roberts. I'm CEO of Nayms. We use smart contracts to code the rules of how insurance risk should be placed, traded, reported, claimed for, analyzed, and settled. A bit of a mouthful. We are essentially an environment or a platform for brokers to place these digital contracts of insurance between buyers and sellers of risk. And we're starting with the area of digital asset risk, sort of a $300 billion plus space, hugely uninsured. And we see, particularly in Bermuda, a huge amount of excitement and new participants setting up to serve that space, either on the brokerage client side or on the capital side with underwriters and capital markets. So yeah, very excited to be working with the BMA and other participants in the island to bring that ecosystem to life.
Okay, well, we'll hear a bit more about that excitement in a little bit, but let's start with just Bermuda's approach to regulating digital assets. First of all, Moad, why is it important to regulate the digital asset business sector?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's a few reasons why we feel it's important to regulate this sector. The first, of course, is protecting customers of digital asset companies. We believe that having an appropriate framework gives them the amount of confidence that they need to deal with entities, which is, of course, beneficial for the entire ecosystem. The second reason is, we provide legal certainty for innovators that then can, focus on the development of their companies instead of trying to figure out if they're captured or not captured under a specific legislation and what the requirements are. And then the third reason is very important, as we've mentioned Bermuda's reputation. We want to maintain it by upholding international standards. So these are the three main reasons. And by achieving this, I think we can create an environment where positive outcomes are achieved for the jurisdiction and for customers of digital assets and financial services more generally.
Okay. Sounds good. So how have you chosen to regulate business? Let's talk a little bit about the substance of the regulation here.
Yeah. So Bermuda benefits by having, a financial services regulator that's integrated, meaning that, as I mentioned in the intro, we're responsible for the supervision of banks, investment businesses, insurance companies, and the likes. Therefore, our approach is also integrated, right? There's oftentimes, a lot of overlap between, an investment company, an insurance company, even a bank and digital asset companies. So we really took from our learnings from the development of other frameworks and try to apply it to the digital asset framework. I think that's an important differentiating factor as compared to other jurisdictions, because in some other jurisdictions, not all of them, a digital asset entity needs to deal with, a very large number of regulators within, one jurisdiction. I'm sure Jeremy could speak to the number of licenses he currently holds in the US, for example. So when building our approach, we did spend some time with innovators to understand what they need as well, right? It's important to understand what customers need in terms of protection to make sure that they can interact in this ecosystem prudently. But we also need to understand what innovators need in order to build the entities, right? So there's kind of this balancing act that happens. And the two main themes that emerge, I guess, is these companies need the ability to pivot quickly. Opportunities in the market are always changing. It's a very fast-growing market. So they need the flexibility to pivot, and they need the requirements to pivot with them. The second thing that I believe they need is the ability to scale. So, companies do not grow linearly anymore. I think companies tend to grow exponentially, and we need to have a risk-based regime that's got the ability to kind of follow that rapid growth. So I think we intended to facilitate both of these things with both on one side pragmatic risk-based regulation, but also on the other side these testing licenses or what is often referred to as sandbox type licenses.
Right.
Our requirements are tailored on on the risks associated with a specific business, right? So one of the things that we often observe in other jurisdictions is, we're a little bit trying to shoehorn an entity into requirements that are not built for it, and it basically stifles innovation, and then it subs there, and then there's this kind of conversation that starts, and by the time this conversation is done, sometimes the opportunity in the market is gone or is gone elsewhere. So I think this is what we had in mind when we build it. Then of course, if we would to get into the specifics, then there's a few legislation, the Digital Asset Business Act that applies to businesses, but also more recently the Digital Asset Issuance Act for companies that are looking to raise capital. But without getting into the weeds of what these things mean in practice, I think the main message for people in the audience who are kind of considering operating out of Bermuda is, come have a conversation with us, and we'll be happy to guide you through the licensing regime and orient you to perhaps the one that is best suited for the type of activity that you intend to do, but also where your business is in terms of growth and development.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how this approach has been received within the industry. And so Jeremy, I'll pose this first question to you. Why did you choose Bermuda as a location for your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, as we were growing, one of the major things that we found is that digital assets in particular really represented a new kind of financial instrument. And in many jurisdictions, whether it's in the United States or Europe or other parts of Asia, regulators were really trying to fit different types of crypto assets and digital assets into the kind of regulatory buckets that already existed for the existing financial system. And so they'd say, well, they're all securities, or maybe they're all commodities or currencies. And the digital asset space is really unique. The innovation that's taking place and the kinds of assets that are being created don't fit those buckets and those definitions really, really clearly. And so as a company that was innovating in the space, with a number of different kind of products and businesses, we were interested in being able to offer a diverse set of products with, as was mentioned by Moad, with legal certainty. And in particular, as we were building businesses that address international markets and address companies and users around the world, having that legal certainty is really important. So we looked at a number of different countries. We looked at a number of different regulatory approaches, and what we found with the Bermuda Digital Asset Business Act was, I think, one of the more thoughtful regulatory frameworks in the world. And it really attempted to define digital assets as a unique new thing that have very clear specific risks associated with them. There are very clear custody risks, consumer protection risks, anti-money laundering risks, things that exist with other financial instruments, but allowed a definition that was a little bit broader than what we were seeing in the United States and in other jurisdictions as well. So that led us to get to know the government and spend time in particular extensively with the BMA, and applied for a sort of full Class F license for that. And now, as we go into 2020, as was noted as well, this space, the crypto space and the digital asset space is a very, very fast moving market. There's an incredible amount happening. And so again, one of the things that we were attracted to was, with the BMA, really stating a desire to be agile with respect to what the innovation that's taking place. And frankly, the Bermuda government, from a legislative perspective, also looking to be agile with respect to things that are taking place, to be on the cutting edge of risk management, to be on the cutting edge of being able to supervise new business models, new technology models, and be able to respond to the market. That was something that was also really attractive because we knew in this space that things were going to be changing at a really rapid clip. And that's exactly, our business has changed dramatically over the last year. And we have new products that we're introducing, this next quarter. And, I think, we're engaged with the Bermuda Monetary Authority around those changes to our business model as well. And so those are all, I think, things that underscored our original interest and ongoing plans to continue to invest in Bermuda.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we'll like to hear a little bit more about those opportunities that you are pursuing and hear about the difference between Circle then and now. But first, I'd like to hear from Dan and just hear a little bit more about why you chose Bermuda as a jurisdiction for your business.
Sure. So, for us, we started in London. We now have a base in Bermuda, base in London. And obviously the insurance industry in sort of Lloyd's market out of London is very vibrant, lots of innovation going on. That also comes with it a lot of noise. And for us, Bermuda seemed to have the two pillars that we wanted to align ourselves with from the beginning. One was kind of industry, and one is a regulatory side. So on the industry side, as obviously a leader in the reinsurance space, sort of ILS more specifically as a market that we're really interested in and sort of applying our contracts to. So sort of not a shortcut, but it seemed a little bit of a sort of fast track immersion into an industry that would really allow us to kind of focus with some early pilots, build very close relationships with people on the island in a way that we didn't get lost amongst the noise. And the second piece on the regulatory side is really just having a progressive and well-developed framework around digital assets and what that regulatory piece looks like. Gave us, well, two things happened. One is it's good for us, gives us clarity on what we're meant to be doing and building, and really allows us to mature and grow as a sort of mature startup that sort of differentiates us alongside a few others to a lot of the kind of noise coming from the digital asset space. As Jeremy mentioned, there's a huge amount going on and some incredible innovation and some not so incredible innovation as well, which adds to that noise. But what it also does is encourages other platforms and products like Circle, like some sort of digital asset bespoke brokers and underwriters to the island as well. And these partners are exactly the kinds of characters that we want to be speaking to and working with. It's not just good for us, it's good for the kind of ecosystem that we're looking to build. So yeah, that regulatory piece has been a huge part of our maturity in the early stages of this business.
Okay, Natalie, from the legal side, what are you hearing? Are you having a lot of interest in Bermuda from potential clients, from existing clients? What's been the response?
I mean, it's a significant amount of interest. In the sort of nearly 3 years since the inception of the landmark legislation, Digital Assets Business Act, we've had consistent sort of inquiries and a number of applications for the Digital Assets Business Act activities, digital assets, to be able to conduct those activities in Bermuda. And that interest has been ranged from sort of startups, entrepreneurial types to established digital assets businesses who may be regulated in other jurisdictions. And the reasons for choosing Bermuda might be investor preference, customer preference. We've touched a little bit upon the sort of the different approach of regulation in, say, the States, for example. And so, many investors are not particularly keen on that nexus. But equally, I think, just to sort of echo what everybody else has been saying, I think by far and away the most important point for most of my clients is legal certainty. And most do appreciate the fact that Bermuda has been a bit pioneering in the way that it categorizes digital assets so that it's not shoehorning them into other pieces of legislation. It's really recognizing their unique nature, as Jeremy said. I think, nearly 3 years on, what I'm seeing now is we have a number of clients who come to us, to Walkers in particularly, because we're a global offshore firm and we can offer advice in a number of jurisdictions. And so we often get asked to recommend the type of jurisdiction. And a lot of people are interested in Bermuda because it is able to walk the walk, not only just talk the talk. So, it's really developed its framework over 3 years. It's 3 years of experience of licensing, 3 years of learnings. And I think, I think what I will say about the BMA is that they are a learning organisation, and so they do listen to industry concerns and have continuously tweaked the legislation. It didn't just get implemented, and then we've already had 2 or 3 amendments to DABA now, and that has been specifically in relation to industry demand, to what the regulator and others are saying is coming along in this sector. So we had an amendment last year that sought to widen the framework and capture derivatives of digital assets and activities around that, in response to industry demand and more financial products and more sophisticated financial products. As Dan mentioned, for InsurTech, it's the only jurisdiction that has an insurance-specific sandbox, and that's backed up by a regulator that's sort of got over 50 years of experience in regulating insurance companies, and that experience and the experience of Moad and its team goes over very well. I think the approach, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more later, but the approach is also going over very well because the BMA is willing to discuss applications very early on and open to sort of listening to and responding with initial feedback. The other thing I would say about Bermuda is, that led by our government, we really have embraced fintech and sought to develop a framework that isn't just legal and regulatory, but also encourages businesses that are necessary to develop that ecosystem to come here. We've seen some amendments to the banking legislation to encourage digital banks to come here, and that's a huge area of interest. I think once that we have those established, that will solve another sort of crucial piece of the digital assets puzzle. And you see it in the government itself putting in things like digital stimulus packages and utilizing digital assets in that way to really show the public how it can be used. So I think I probably end by saying, it's a great place for a business to come and demonstrate what the capabilities of digital assets are, and whether you stay here or whether you use that as a launch pad internationally. I think it's just a great place to start that. Yeah.
So once you've chosen Bermuda as a jurisdiction for your business, then let's hear a little more about the experience of the application process, working with the BMA. Moad, you may want to put your, may want to take your headset off. I'd like to hear a bit about how people are working with the BMA. And Dan, I'll start with you. What has been your experience working with the BMA to get through the licensing process and to be able to kind of get up and running?
Sure. Largely very positive. That's probably saying far less than it is actually the case. I don't have a huge amount of experience before this whole process from the regulatory side, and it can be quite a daunting process, the idea of building a regulated business. But one, I guess, factor that allows us, or sort of sets the scene, is that we're really on instant messaging terms with your direct counterparty at the regulator, which is something that I feel I already take for granted, but seems to be relatively unique in our ability to keep communication open and incredibly fast. So that sort of feedback loop is kind of startup pace, which is not expected. To remind myself that that probably won't be the case with other places that we start to look at. So That's really a phenomenal benefit of this whole process for us. Is the application stage was, as a startup, you're incredibly driven. You've got a very passionate team that wants to get things done. When the ball is in our court, we really make sure that we are doing what we can to get it in someone else's court, whether that's a partner or an investor or a regulator, so that we can keep things moving forward. And a kind of real death of startups, and therefore innovation, is that ball being kept on in someone else's side of the net for so long. And in this case, that hasn't been the case at all. So very positive process for us. It's allowed us to, as I kind of mentioned, touched on earlier, mature as a startup from the beginning. We do so every day. We have regular meetings and an awful lot to get done between those meetings, and every month that goes by, we become more presentable to investors, more presentable to our partners. We become more sort of able to both make our internal team sort of get them up to speed on the requirements that is needed from everyone, and also allows us to focus on really good key hires, and they're not just coming into a scrappy startup, but one that has kind of an internal process down, and a very close relationship with the regulator. So very, very positive so far. Obviously, I think you touched upon, we're in the sandbox on the IGB license side, and that comes to an end next May. So there's a huge amount still during this phase that we still sort of see as part of our application for a full license. Right. We need to get through to sort of emerge as a fully functioning regulated business from now and next year.
Okay, and Jeremy, I believe Moad mentioned that you may have several other licenses in other jurisdictions, and the positives of having one financial services regulator here in Bermuda, and just talked about how accessible the BMA has been. How has the experience in Bermuda differed for you from that of other jurisdictions?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've been working in the regulated crypto space really since 2014. When we got started, there were very few regulations around this area, and so we had to spend a lot of time in the U.S. and Europe, really getting set up. So we're licensed. We have operations and subsidiaries in the U.S. that are money transmission companies, what's called a New York BIT license, which is a designation by the Wall Street regulator around digital currency activity. We also operate a regulated broker dealer and an alternative trading system license with FINRA. And then in Europe, what's called an e-money issuer license. And now there's new registrations that are emerging there. In Bermuda, I think in the US, just as an example, we have to deal with 50 states. We have to deal with specific kind of registrations with the Treasury Department. We have to deal with a separate regulator that looks after, kind of commodities trading law, separate regulators on securities law. So it's quite diverse, and that is, I think, just the nature of the U.S. federal system. On the other hand, just going to Europe, in some ways Europe is simpler because you have passporting, and you get a license and you can passport that through the European Economic Area as well. But I would say, again, there's more discrete regulators that exist there as opposed to a single one. So in Bermuda, obviously, it's as I like to say, it's one throat to choke, meaning there's one clear place that you go when you need to figure out what to get done, and I think that's really critical, and I think that's reflected in the Digital Asset Business Act, which I think really looks to think comprehensively about the wide range of financial services products that are going to be created using digital assets and blockchains. And so I think it's both reflected in legislation, it's reflected in the regulatory approach. And I think that's really meaningful for companies that are seeking to be licensed and operate out of Bermuda.
If I can add to that, maybe a lot of a lot of jurisdictions are going to be adopting legislation around digital assets, and when we think about what are some of the main differentiating factors of the BMA, it's definitely that proximity, that ability to get a clear answer quickly, but also the innovation mindset, right? Accepting that there's a lot of things that we know and we have data points for, but there's also other things that we don't know, and we need to work with the companies in close collaboration, and getting educated at times about some of the latest market developments. So I think this idea that collaboration and some of the softer aspects of the environment are also going to be very critical going forward.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we often highlight as a jurisdiction is how well that collaboration works between the government and the regulator and the industry to shape policies and legislation and make adjustments even after legislation has been put in place. And Natalie, you mentioned in your introduction that you are the chair of a legal and regulatory working group housed within the BDA. So is that one of the channels that we're using for adjustments or proposed adjustments to fintech legislation?
It is. It's one of many. I think, the BMA uses various methods, both informal and formal, to consult with the industry. But as chair of that subcommittee, one of the things that we do is we look at the practice of the law and how our clients are experiencing the application of it, and we make suggestions. We discuss the application process. We make suggestions as to how to improve or our observations. And the one thing I can say is, it really has satisfied me to see how interactive the BMA, the government, the registrar of companies has been with that agency, particularly in my experience. And when we looked recently at some suggestions for reforms, within a week we had all key stakeholders, including Moad himself, talking to us about what we were seeing in practice and giving their initial feedback. And that they're going to go away and really evaluate the changes that they could make to improve the systems, and so it's an evolving regime. I think it matters that we have a government that is openly embracing fintech and is motivated to get that environment set up and working in the best way possible. And I think, to echo Moad, I think the approach to licensing and the flexibility of it is constantly informing everyone, the practitioners, the BMA, as to the type of businesses that we're seeing and what they need in terms of regulation. And one of the things that I will say, having observed a number of licensing applications, is that the BMA is hands-on but empowering with respect to companies and helping them think through their own problems and evaluating their own risks, and for the most part is able to sort of stand behind those evaluations. So I think it is a very accessible regime, and one that I think works really well, embraces innovation, but protects investors, protects customers, and as I said, long may that sort of lines of communication stay open, because I think it's actually critical to a real framework that works for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you for that. So Moad, I'll just ask you to give us a quick overview of the tiered licensing system that we have in place under the Digital Asset Business Act. Can you just give us a description of those?
Yeah. it's interesting that you asked, because we currently have a consultation paper out, and we're proposing a redesign of this licensing process. So and I think Dan alluded to it a little bit earlier when he mentioned this difficulty in graduating from a sandbox license to a fully licensed institution, and there's definitely some literature around that in academic papers. But what we're proposing now is to move to a 3-tier licensing regime with having a sandbox license for testing and piloting projects, which is going to be called the T license. Having a modified license, which will be the bridge between the sandbox license and the full license for companies under stricter requirements and stricter monitoring to build their compliance program fully. And then in the full license regime, removing some of the restrictions, but also making sure that these companies meet the full set of requirements under the legislation. So, we kind of take this kind of risk-based approach through the spectrum or through the life cycle of these companies. And I think this would be a first. I'm not aware of a jurisdiction that is trying to apply a similar type of licensing regime. So we're pretty excited about that. Yeah.
Okay, sounds.
And just to add to that, Moad, I think it sort of speaks to our jurisdiction's ability to take in, the whole gamut of fintech companies. So you could apply from the get-go for a full license, for example, if your business was fully operational, but or you might be appropriate for a Class M or a T to begin with. But that evolution is there, and that means that we are really capable of handling all natures of applications and all types of businesses.
Right. So we know that the tiered licensing system was intended to accommodate both startups and more mature companies. And from a startup's perspective, Dan, Nayms has a Class M license. Do you find that working within this framework supports or restricts what you're trying to do in terms of your business?
It probably restricts us where we're meant to be restricted. But yeah, for us, we're lucky because timing works well with the kind of roadmap laid out by the sandbox and everything beyond that. So, we were wanting to be doing our testing and iteration during this kind of 12 months anyway. That's all in line with our sort of funding roadmap, with our hiring roadmap. So, yeah, it's actually provided us, instead of going through our iteration and build and testing and feedback with users stage outside of a regulated environment, and then suddenly going to a full launch with a fully, full license and scaling from then, we wouldn't have the internal process to understand really what we were going to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of lucky. I'll leave it for other startups to comment on that sort of restriction versus support, but for us it's a perfect way of sort of growing in the early stages in a way that's relevant for the later stages. So this isn't just about the product and tech and gaining users, but we saw really early on that there was going to be a pretty low ceiling to our growth if we didn't embrace the regulatory side. The sort of 12-month sandbox has acted as a place for us to go through that early product development in a relevant way. So yeah, fully supportive in that sense.
So you have an M-Class license and you're working within the insurance sandbox, correct?
That's right, yeah. And I guess the conversation between ourselves and the BMA at the moment is what exactly does that full license look like? Is it a single license? Is it more on the insurance side? We really have that flexibility to, we have our general responsibilities and parameters set by the current guidelines and regulation that we have, licenses that we have now. But we're still able to present revisions to that to the BMA within that time, if opportunities come up that are outside of that scope, so that we can continue, hopefully for the BMA to learn more about what we're doing, and for us to learn more about what we're doing, but also what we're allowed to be doing as time goes on. So yeah, it's a nice mix. But yeah, Class M and then the IGB license sandbox.
So Jeremy, you have obtained a full license, and you talked a little bit before about some of the things that you've been able to work with the BMA or have begun working through with the BMA in relation to some of the changes that you are making at Circle, or some of the opportunities that you're pursuing. Can you talk a little bit about that and the difference between Circle when it obtained its full license and where it's headed now, a year later?
Yeah, sure. So at a high level, when we obtained the full license, we had a number of different product lines and businesses, and one of those, which was an exchange business that we had operated, we ended up spinning out and selling that business late last year. And that business was one that was very much a focus of the coverage of the Class F license. Walking into this year, we've been building up a really broad new suite of services, really centered around using US dollar coin, the stable coin, as a payment and settlement system on the internet. And that's really grown enormously. It's grown 500% this year, and we're launching a range of products and services for businesses that want to use stablecoins in everyday commerce. One of the things that's happened in the digital currency market is there's been this incredible growth in people who are using stablecoins as a way to lend and borrow. Essentially, there are interest rate markets that have emerged around stablecoins that has grown quite large this year. And so some of the things that we're exploring are ways that we can facilitate businesses being able to tap into these emerging interest rate markets in digital dollars and in digital dollar stablecoins. And so I can't comment too specifically on specific products or activities in conversations with the BMA, but just broadly, thematically, these are some of the things that we're seeing in the market, and where there's a lot of really interesting global demand around these. And so sort of continuing to explore how those kinds of products could be offered globally, and working with our regulator in Bermuda.
And we certainly heard, I believe, at last year's Tech Summit, how the government is looking to be able to accept payments for various fees and taxes, even by using stable coins. So we certainly look forward to our progression in that respect. And we know that there are also a lot of market changes that have occurred, at least over the last year. We know that the pandemic has created a bit of uncertainty in financial markets and has impacted businesses in various ways. Might there be a greater opportunity for increased adoption or acceptance of digital assets as a representation of value with that uncertainty in traditional financial markets? Moad, what kinds of trends are you seeing in relation to digital assets, and how is the BMA preparing for those changes?
Well, I mean, there's no shortage of trends in digital assets, but I think Bermuda is well positioned to capture a few opportunities. One of them is, for entities that are seeking to cross the bridge between traditional financial services and fintech. I'm thinking of companies like Nayms, for example, or kind of providing, insurance and kind of traditional into a fintech package. Another opportunity is definitely the use of stable coins to create infrastructure, or actually to leverage stablecoin as an infrastructure to create financial services platform. And then people can kind of layer financial products on top of that infrastructure. I think that's a very interesting development. And then I think the recent amendments around digital asset derivatives that we brought last year under DABA, I think that portion of the market is growing rapidly. We hope that we can bring more regulated players in that market in Bermuda. So yeah, this is another area where I think the jurisdiction is well positioned.
For that. Dan, let's come back to you and talk about some of the ways in which you believe digital assets will intersect with the traditional financial system to help relieve some of the challenges that we've seen existing or that we've come up with regard to even being able to raise capital.
Yeah, so I guess there's always this balance in the crypto space. There's sort of a grassroots mentality, and there's a, I guess, more kind of top-down institutionalized mentality towards the technology. There's crossover on both of those sides, but the general grassroots area, I think the benefits come from inclusion, access to financial services, whether that's via, identity verification, distributed lending platforms, prediction markets, these sorts of new technologies that are allowing basically anyone and everyone to access new kinds of services that they weren't able to before. The more kind of top-down side and context, I guess that's technology being used with bigger regulated institutions. The financial services industry is a heavily regulated space, rightly so. I think a lot of that comes from capital, access to capital, as you say, but also like efficient capital allocation. I think this technology can be used to not just allow the larger money to allocate their capital more efficiently within structures that are much more cost efficient, but even be a gateway to smaller sources of capital, smaller funds, etc., that can access this kind of this sort of insurance risk or other kind of financial market risk in an efficient manner. So yeah, that kind of balance between grassroots innovation and then sort of technology being integrated into bigger firms, and then as sort of COVID's come along, as you mentioned, there's hopefully a greater need to move in that direction.
All right, so I know we're coming towards the end of our session here. I'd like to wrap up with just a few quick questions, and I'll start with you, Jeremy. As you move forward with a new stablecoin and some of the other things that you would like to see be very successful with Circle's opportunities, what would you say to persons who still view certain assets or certain digital assets rather as a vehicle for crime?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting in 2013, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the U.S. regulator that looks after financial crimes in the global financial system, made very clear what the obligations were of digital currency firms that were interfacing with the traditional financial system. And that has led to, I think, a fairly consistent framework for know your customer and anti-money laundering that's been rolled out broadly around the world. Those standards at an international level have been reinforced through the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, which really looks after kind of fundamental financial crimes standards and regulatory supervision on a global basis. There's just been a great deal of attention on making sure that's done right. I think the industry as a whole has been I think very good at adopting those standards, and there's more work to do in part because digital currency it goes outside the bounds of how we've traditionally thought about money. It's money becomes more like a piece of content on the internet that you can instantly exchange with people everywhere, and so there are new opportunities and benefits that come with that, and new risks as well. And so I think the collaboration with regulators on those issues will continue.
Okay, and then we'll just end with a couple quick questions. I'll start with you, Moad. What would you tell to people who are still considering jurisdictions for a home for their business?
Oh, good question. Good question for a regulator. No, I think I'd come back to this notion of look beyond the regulatory obligations. Look at the culture. Look at the ability to get a response quickly. Look at the ability to work with the regulator on a collaborative basis. And that's something you're not going to know until you have a discussion. So for people who are still on the sidelines wondering, should I go to Bermuda or X other jurisdiction? I'd say have a conversation with both jurisdictions, compare the approach, understand what you get into, and then you're going to be in a position to take the right decision.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Thank you very much to all of the members of the panel for a wonderful discussion. And thanks to the viewing audience for joining us today. Take care.